Okay, so it's lesson 3, part 2. So we've built our first page that runs a query, but it looks terrible. So we want to add some formatting to this. We want to do something like this, where we're using an HTML table, and then we're going to add in Bootstrap, some CSS to do some basic formatting with it. So I'm going to go back to PHP Storm. And I'm going to make a new file. So I'm going to make a new PHP file. I'm just going to call this one items.php. Just put in the title of grocery list. And let's take the code from our item simple query. Let's take everything, all our PHP code, and we'll just copy it over. And I'm going to paste it into the body here, and then we're going to make a few changes to it. First of all, I want to get rid of all this extra white space. And I will put my password back in. Again, use your own password to connect to your own database. So I'm going to remove the white space in the individual code blocks. We're going to write the same query, use the same command. So I'm not really changing anything in the first 4 sections, other than taking away the white space. But I am going to change this section. So outside of our loop, we want to create an HTML table. So before we start looping through everything, we'll now put in to start an HTML table for formatting. So we'll use an echo command, and I want to print out an HTML table tag and 3 headings. Actually, I guess just 2 headings. We don't need to show the IDs. So we'll have a name, and we'll have a quantity heading. So this has to go before the loop. Okay. Where should we close the table? Right, after the loop. Ms. Soma, you may need to... is my volume quiet for other people as well? Feels like I'm talking loudly. I'll check my microphone settings. Good on my end. Okay, so you may just need to increase your volume. Quiet? Okay. Is that any better? My mic is at max volume now. volume any better this way? Okay. So as Lee said, after the loop, we want to close the table. So we'll close our table here. So we need to do some formatting in here. For every item in the grocery list, we want to show two columns. Right? We want to show the name column and the quantity column. So what things do we need to do on line 38? What changes should we make so that not only is the name displayed, but the quantity is displayed, and that these also go inside our HTML columns? So we need to make some changes here. What could we change on line 38? Ivan, you mean here? We want to make it uppercase? Okay. Yeah, we do want it to be lowercase, you're right, because it's lowercase in the table. But how are we going to format this inside our table? If I refresh the page, whoops, sorry, if I run it as items.php, we have our table heading, but our values are printing outside. Okay, you got it, Ivan. That's the first thing we need. So inside our loop, instead of printing out item name, we want a new table row. Jazeel, good guess, but yeah, we're not inserting, because inserting would be adding new data to the database. Here we just want to display. So what would we do after we open a new row? Well, we will need to close it. Yep. Where should we close the row, Ivan? Okay. So we want to close the row at the end. Yep, I'd agree with that. So we'll concatenate on a closing TR tag. So the TRs, these create rows in the table. How do we create individual cells or columns in the table? Because we want every row to have two columns. A column that displays the name and then a second column that displays the quantity. So we need some other HTML formatting here. How do we create a cell or a column inside a table? I'm sure you guys must have done this with Scott in your Web Fundamentals class. Good guess, Owen. TH we use for the heading. So it creates, and yes, I probably should have put in here, you got it, Ivan. Up here, I should have put in T head. Up here to create a row. Okay, you never use tables. Okay, all right. Wasn't sure. So we use tables not for layout, but we do use tables for tabular data. When we're showing, no, we don't need another command. We're just formatting the HTML. We'd only use commands when we're interacting with the database or issuing database commands. So we've only got one command here, and that's fine because we only need to run one SQL statement on this page. So to create a cell, we're going to use TD. And over here, we're going to close. So TD stands for table data, and it defines a cell in the table. So all our code is actually the exact same as on our previous page, except for this. This is replacing the for each loop we had here. So I'm going to save these changes. I'll put it up on paste of code in a minute, but let's see what we get. What do you think this is going to look like if we refresh the browser now? What's our list of items going to look like? Okay, well, let's try it out. You think it's going to look like a table? Okay, in MySQL, well, let's check. Okay, kind of. So it's mostly working. What's missing? Right, we've got our headings, and when we use that TH, they automatically get bolded. And then we've got 12 rows with all the food in the proper column. So it's looking good, but we need to complete it. So what are we missing to complete this? Right. Well, actually, Megan, we grabbed it. Right. That's right, Ivan. It is in our query, but we haven't displayed the new column. So I'm just going to add it in here. So that we're going to open a second column. And then we want to output the quantity value in there. So now our page, our table should be complete. I'll upload the full code for you in just a minute. So for every item in the list, we create a row, we create a new column, we insert the name value from the database, and we close the first column. Then we open a second column, we insert the quantity value from the database, we output it, we close the column, and we close the row. And this loop will run for as many records as we have in our database query. So I'll save. So now we've got a proper table. I will put all this up in case you're missing anything. And you need to modify your page. There's the link, should you need it. So anytime we want to display a list of data from the database, we're basically doing the process we just followed. Connect to the database, write an SQL query to fetch out whatever information we like, prepare and execute the query, call fetch all and store the results, use whatever HTML formatting in and around our loop so that lets us display all of the data. So if we go and look at some of the dynamic web pages we looked at last week, we said all of the content here is dynamic. It all comes from the database, everything between the header and footer. So there's a query on this page that selects all of the top news stories, fetches them, and then uses similar code to what we see to print them out. Same thing, we go somewhere like if we go here and look at, let's say, the college's Facebook profile, There's a database connection made. There's a query that goes and fetches all of the content belonging to the college's profile. And then it's using a loop to output the news feed. So it just displays them one after the other, all the items that are here. So any web page that shows a list of data, the only thing that really changes is what database do we connect to? What query do we want? Where is the data? What table? And then what kind of HTML formatting are we using for the data? So in this case, we're using a simple HTML table, a grid of rows and columns. Now I do want to add, actually, I'll just pause for a minute. Are there any questions about what we're doing on this page? We're going to do this a lot. We're going to build lots of HTML tables in this class where the contents are queried from the database and then displayed in rows and columns. That's actually what we're going to do for Lab 1.
Hey, Rich. My table isn't working, and I copy and pasted your code after mine, and it still isn't working.
Okay, when you say it isn't working, can you be a little more specific?
It shows my item name in the browser, but it doesn't show name or quantity.
Okay, and there is data in the database when you run the query in MySQL Workbench?
Yeah, there's one.
Okay.
Yeah, I have one entry in the.
So there's one entry. And you are loading your items.php page.
Hold on. Oh, there we go. No, I was loading the wrong page. That was the issue. I was loading the simple query PHP. That's my bad.
Glad it's working. Thank you for the tip, Megan. Good suggestion. Okay, so we've got a working page here. I want to add a little formatting to this. So what we're going to use is we're going to use Bootstrap. So to show you what Bootstrap gives us, just to give you an idea, is go to components. So Bootstrap comes with all these pre-built styles. So for example, buttons, it comes with like 8 different colors of buttons, which we can customize. It gives us things like button groups, if we want to use for navigation. Comes with pre-built responsive navigation bar, which we're going to use, so something like this. Comes with things like, what else is here? Alerts, so if we want to show messages to users, gives us these alert bars. So this is a free library. It was actually originally created at Twitter. And it's really common for developing dynamic sites. So we're going to download Bootstrap and include it in our project, and then we can use the CSS so that our table is going to look better. So in the Lesson 3 folder, here's the link. You click on Bootstrap CSS Framework. It's going to take you to the Bootstrap 5, which is the latest version. I haven't worked with version 5 before, so there may be some new stuff for me in here. And on this page, right here, there's a big purple download button. So I'm going to download this zip file into my htdocs LAMP folder. We'll click download. I'm going to save this file inside of my XAMPP htdocs. I'm going to put it in my LAMP food and save it. Then I'm going to go to my lamp food folder in Windows, in my Windows Explorer. You can get to it in your Mac Finder. I'm going to extract. And that's going to create this Bootstrap 5 beta folder, which I'm going to go into. And in here, there's two subfolders, CSS and JavaScript. I want to move these two folders. I'm just going to move them up one level. I don't want them in this Bootstrap 5 beta 1 dist. I want to get rid of that folder. So I'm just going to do this. I'm going to go in here. I'll just highlight them. I'm just going to drag them into my lamp food. I'm just going to move them, or you can cut and paste them. I want to move them up one folder. So I'll just drag them. So now my Bootstrap 5 folder is empty, and I've got CSS and JS right here in the root. Now I can actually get rid of the Bootstrap folder and the zip. So I'll just delete them. So now inside my CSS, I have all these Bootstrap style sheets. So and you download the file, unzip it, and move the CSS and JS folders to the root of your lamp food project. There's a lot of files there. We don't need most of them, but we're going to use a few of them. So if we want to include, let's say, the Bootstrap, the minified, the compressed version of the CSS, we want to include it on our items page. How would we do that? So we could use the classes in that style sheet. Because right now we've got no style sheet, no formatting at all on our items page. Downloaded, extracted the files, and moved the CSS and JavaScript to my lamp food. How do we actually use one of these style sheets? Adil, good guess. We would add the style tag if we wanted to put the style definitions right in the HTML file. So that's almost what we're doing, but not quite. We're using the external style sheet instead. So what tag would we add instead of a style tag? Right, Hannah. Good. Right, you got it. Okay, thanks, Adil. Thanks, Owen. So let's go to our items file. Let's scroll up to the top, and in the header, we'll add rel equals style sheet. I could add the type as text/CSS. And my href, so notice, it brings up my CSS folder. And I want this one, bootstrap.min.css. That's the minified, the compressed version. It's going to run the fastest. I'll actually just put this whole link in the chat. So we're going to add that and save the file. And by adding the style sheet, if we go back to the browser and refresh our page, we're going to see some styles get applied automatically. There are some default styles in Bootstrap. Now we can override them. So if I refresh, how can you tell that some CSS has been applied? What changed? Yeah, and the font changed as well, right? So different default font in the Bootstrap style sheet. When I inspect it, yeah, and the positioning as well, and some of the spacing. So the default font here is sans serif. So there's some classes in here to format tables so that they look better. We want a table that looks a little more like this one. So we can add a few of the classes that come with the Bootstrap style sheet. So if we look in their examples for the different tables, so we could add a table class, and here are some variants. We want something like this. So maybe we'll pick on line 35, we'll add a class equals, and then in double quotes, we'll say maybe table and table primary. Let's see what this gives us. So I've added a class definition to our table. And it gives it a blue background, and it also makes the table scale to 100% width. I also want, try one more thing. I don't know, I like table primary. I'm going to try table striped, which should give me alternating background colors. Yeah, it's a little better. So you can play around with some of the different classes. You can explore what's here in the documentation. Maybe I want table striped and table light. I want gray, light gray, not blue. So Bootstrap's kind of a quick and easy way to add some formatting. Rather than creating our own styles, we can use this free library. Although eventually we'll want to do some customizing. Otherwise, any site that uses Bootstrap, they all look kind of the same if they all use the same classes. Okay, so a quick and easy way to do a little formatting. Okay, so our table page is, I think I'm happy with it. Your href isn't working to the style sheet. So a deal, you want to check in your project that your CSS folder with the CSS files is here. If your href isn't working, then the CSS folder probably isn't in the right location. So you need to check that the CSS file is in the root of your LAMP folder. If that href isn't working, it may not be here. No problem. So if that href isn't working, that means the path you're looking for, it's not. Yep, okay. So that's always the clue when href doesn't work. Is the file we're linking to, is it in the right place? So now we're starting to get here, right? We're getting somewhere. We can add. We created this last week, so we can add to our database. And now, if I look at my items, right, we can query. So we can both create and read data in our little grocery shopping list application. Not beautiful, there's lots more we want to do, but it's a start. We're making progress. And we've added Bootstrap for some formatting. Our form doesn't have any Bootstrap CSS yet, but we'll add that in a few weeks. We're going to come back and do some more work on this page in a little bit. Okay, now showing data in tables, this is just one of the ways that we display lists of data, right? We use HTML tables, TR and TD, so that we can build tabular data, grid of rows and columns, right? So something like, for example, let's go here. Right, we might see a grid using these sorts of tags on a page like this. Right, so we've got column headings, and then we've got rows and columns. So something like this would be common use for HTML tables. What other kinds of formatting do we commonly see on web pages where we're outputting a list of data from the database? So HTML tables, so rows and columns, that's one option. What other Ivan, I'm not quite sure what you mean. Can you clarify? Okay, yeah, we can have drop-down menus. So here, for example, right, we've probably got a query selecting a list of the seasons from the NHL database, from a seasons table, and populating the drop-down list with all the records from the query. It's a great example of deal. How else can we present a list of data that comes from a database query in a web application? So we've got tables, we've got drop-down menus. What other kinds of HTML formatting could we use for displaying query results? Yeah, sure, we could have buttons. Loop through and generate a button. Good suggestion. Yeah, Christopher, exactly, right? Let's have a look here. Right, when we go to photos, right, this is what all Instagram is, or a Facebook photo album, right? When we click on an album, this runs a query. It says fetch all the image names from this album, and in a loop, what does it display? An IMG tag. It's basically all Instagram is. It's a list of queries, is a query that displays a list of images. Yeah, we've got lists as well. So we can list data, so something like the posts on a social media feed, again, we're just outputting items in a list. Or something like, here's another common use of lists for navigation. So on this site, that's actually my mom, who turned 80 yesterday, and she's learned WordPress and she built. So all of the links here, they come from the database. She adds a new page or new link. There's a query that creates UL and LI tags that fetches the list of links from the database. So we can use lists, we can use images, we can use tables, we can use drop downs, we can use buttons. All of these are just different HTML kind of formatting or wrapping around our query results. So let's try one of these. Maybe we'll try, I like the idea that, that Adil suggested. How do we create a drop-down list from a query? It's a really common thing. Probably every web application you ever build is going to have a drop-down list that's filled from a query. So let's try it. Let's make a new page. New PHP file. I'll call this, let's see. We'll call it select an item. So in this page, we want to fetch the list of items from the database, and we want to populate them into a drop-down list. We'll say fill drop-down from database query. That'll be our title. So we're going to repeat. I'll hand code it rather than copy and paste it, but we're going to repeat a lot of the same steps we've already done. We need to connect to the database. We need to write our query. We need to set up and execute the query. And then we need to use a loop to populate. Now, for a dropdown is an input, so we're going to need a form first. Method equals post. And our action will go to display item.php. We'll put on a field set tag. If we've got time, we'll add a little formatting with Bootstrap as well. We'll put on a label. And what HTML tag do we use to generate a drop-down list? So we want to give the users a list that they pick from. Thank you, Ivan. So we're going to use an HTML select tag. Our name will be equal to name, and our ID will be equal to name. And then down below, we'll maybe just add a button that just says find. I'll put this code up on Pastebin so far. It's pretty simple. It's just HTML. There's no PHP here. There shouldn't be anything too crazy. There's the link to the HTML if you need it. If I load it in the browser, it just looks like this. Just an empty drop-down list so far. So we're actually going to write all our PHP code in here. Actually, I don't want to call this name. I'm going to change this. We'll just call it item instead. So inside my opening and closing select, we're going to put our PHP code. We're going to connect, write the query, set up the command, execute query, and store the results data. So we're going to write all the comments first. Then we're going to loop through the data and add a new item to the dropdown for each one. So if there's 13 items in my database, there will be 13 options in my dropdown. And then we'll disconnect. So I'm kind of going to combine a few of the steps, but the code will be really similar to what we've done so far, except this part, right? The formatting of the data is now going to go into a drop-down list instead of a table. So to connect, I'll just hard code my credential in here. And I'll make sure I finish it with a semicolon. If you want, you can copy the line from the other file. I'm going to modify the query just a little bit. I'm going to select item ID and name from items. It would work in our other pages. We've selected all the columns. We've selected star. Why might it be a good idea to only select the ID and name in this query? Why exclude the quantity column? It will work if we include the quantity, but it's probably better to leave it out. How come? So I've modified the query to only select the item ID and the name. The other pages where we've run the query, we've selected all the columns. So that includes the ID, item ID, the name, and the quantity. Jeremy, absolutely. Why is this going to be faster? Yeah, Hannah, exactly. Right? Now, maybe it doesn't make a big difference right now because there's only a few records in our database. But if the database is really big, there's, adding additional columns on that we don't need to the query, yeah, it slows it down. So we only need the ID and name for the dropdown, so let's omit the quantity. You can use star here, but better performance if we don't. So I'll create my command, again by calling prepare on our database object. So same code we've done before. We'll call execute. And again, I'll call fetch all. So this is going to populate the items array with the item names and IDs. Down at the bottom, I'll just disconnect, set my DB to null. So now we need our loop. We want to loop through items. And I'll just create a slightly simpler variable. I'll just say as item. So items is my list, and item is the current element in the array, current element in the list. So how do we place these? How do we create individual choices in the select box? We want to echo something, but we need another tag to go inside our HTML select. Does anybody know what tag we use for building a drop-down? The individual choices in the drop-down list? Thank you, Lee. So we're going to echo out an option tag. And we're going to use the ID as the value and the name as the text. So we'll say value equals, and I'm going to put in a double quote here. And then we're going to append on our ID. So there's going to be our opening option tag. It's going to have a value, and that value is going to come from the database. And then for the text, the users don't see the IDs. The users are going to see the item names. And then we're going to close our option. So I'm going to try this out. Let's see what it looks like. So everything up till here is exactly the same as what we've already done, other than I made a slight modification to the SQL statement, but nothing major. But again, we're changing the formatting, we're changing the wrapping or packaging around our data. On this page, we wrapped it in table, tr, and td tags. On this page, we're wrapping it in select and option tags. So it's going to look different. So now when I refresh, here's our list. So we get the exact same data that we got on the items page, but instead of a grid, it's in a drop-down list. And if we view the source of our page, we can see we've got options, and the options have the IDs as the values. So we're going to pass these IDs to the next page. How are we doing for time? 350. Okay, I will put this code up in case you need to reference it. Here it is. And let's take a pause here. Are there any questions before we do about what we're doing here? So we're going to take a quick break, 10 minutes. When we come back, we'll add a little formatting with Bootstrap here. We'll build our display item page where we're going to use fetch instead of fetch all. And then I'll give you your lab. Okay, so it'll probably be another, I don't know, we'll be done by 4:30 today. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording and we'll come back in 10